Setting learning objectives and providing feedback effectively begins with the use of Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is a classification of the different objectives and skills that educators set for their students. The taxonomy was proposed in 1956 by Benjamin Bloom, an educational psychologist at the University of Chicago. The terminology has been recently updated to include the following 6 levels of learning. These 6 levels can be used to structure the learning objectives, lesson, and assessments of your course. Remembering, recalling facts and certain concepts. Understanding, explaining ideas or concepts. Analyzing, taking apart information to show relationships, causes, and connections. Applying, using information in new situations to answer questions or solve problems. Evaluating, making judgments based on criteria and standards through checking and critiquing. And creating, producing something new. Studies of setting objectives and providing feedback using metacognition. The study of setting objectives is to emphasize the importance of supporting students as they self-select learning targets, self-monitor their progress, and self-assess their own development. A way of doing this is through using metacognitive strategies. Metacognition is usually defined as thinking about thinking. When students use metacognitive skills, they monitor their progress in learning new materials, correcting misconceptions, analyzing the effectiveness of their learning strategies, and change their learning behaviors when necessary. They use self-reflection, self-responsibility, and initiative to determine whether a cognitive goal has been met. Using metacognitive strategies and providing metacognitive feedback enhances a student's ability to learn. It is essential that teachers identify and understand different learning styles when setting learning objectives and providing feedback effectively for students. Differences in students' learning styles are often due to differences in their cognitive style. A student's cognition has to do with how they respond to their environment and how they process information. Different learning styles that should be considered when setting learning objectives and providing effective feedback are the following. Number 1, environmental. This is preferences in lighting, sounds, temperature, and physical room arrangement. Creating an effective classroom environment means ensuring that you create a space where students feel safe and comfortable expressing themselves and their style of learning. Number 2, emotional. This is a preference and level of students' responsibility and persistence, structure, and supervision. Self-reliance and self-confidence are 2 very important qualities to give your students. A teacher should set objectives and provide feedback that ignites each of these qualities. Number 3 is sociological. This is a preference for a large or small group, for being alone, or for needing adult assistance. It is essential that teachers understand and consider why some students work better in large groups and why some work more effectively in smaller groups. Teachers should establish what type of setting works best for each individual student and how to implement small and whole group instruction into their lesson plans. Number 4 is physical. This is a sensory mode preference, which has to do with visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. Using sensory strategies
Students benefit from the setting objective strategy by gaining a better understanding of what is expected of them in the classroom, on specific assignments, and during activities. Setting objectives helps students see the importance of the activity being performed and what they should be learning from the activity. This strategy also encourages students to self-assess their learning. They can determine if they are meeting the objectives and whether or not they need to ask for help. These objectives also help students to become intrinsically motivated not only to meet the teacher-set objectives, but to set and meet their own personal learning objectives as well.
Is one who learns best by listening and
Teachers,
speaking.
by setting objectives for your students, you are clearly communicating what you expect from them in the classroom, on their assignments, and during activities. This is beneficial to you because you can ensure that your students have a strong grasp on what is going on in the class and what they are expected to learn. This also cuts back on time wasted from students asking what they will be doing and why they are doing it multiple times a day. Students benefit from the providing feedback strategy by gaining a better understanding of what changes need to be made in order to meet the learning objectives. When the teacher provides clear and constructive feedback, the student can then comprehend how they can adjust their study habits or how they are approaching the assignment in order to meet the learning objectives. Providing feedback is not just the teacher saying, this is right or this is wrong. The teacher should explain why something is right or wrong, and then give advice that will get the student on the right track. Providing feedback is beneficial to teachers because you get a chance to assess every child and address their needs. When providing feedback, you can not only explain what they did right and wrong, but you can also explain why they were right or wrong and offer advice and help. This also gives you a chance to see who's struggling and who needs to be challenged more. From here, you can determine the best way to proceed with each student. You can also communicate with the parents when providing feedback. For example, if you have a daily or weekly folder that gets sent home, you can write notes to parents about how their children are doing in certain areas, and also mention praises and concerns. When setting objectives for your students, you should be sure to use SMART goals. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. These objectives should be clear and explicit. They should be able to be assessed in some way. The goals should be suited to the age and ability levels of the students, and they should be consistent with the topic being taught. They should also have some sort of time frame or due date. Some additional tips to setting objectives and implementing this in your classroom. Again, make sure objectives are clear and attainable. Make sure to clearly state the objectives not only to the students, but to the parents so they know what's going on. Work with students to create personal learning objectives and relate objectives to previous and future lessons. These are some tips for implementing the providing feedback strategy into your classroom. You should provide feedback that recognizes what is correct and clarifies how the student should proceed. You should provide constructive feedback and in a timely manner. Provide feedback that supports the objective and activity criteria. And finally, include students by having them provide feedback to peers or by having them evaluate their work and provide feedback to you.